Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. It's me, Megan, and I'm back with another book in my Stephen King project where I'm reading a chapter a week, give or take, in my Stephen King project. The next book that I just finished reading is Different Seasons, which is his collection of 4 novellas that take place over the different seasons. So we start with spring, move into summer, go into fall, and end on winter, which I think is actually a really genius way of writing short stories or like classic or little novellas. So I thought that was really cool, and I kind of like the way that he ordered these. So before I jump in, if you haven't read this book, there's going to be spoilers. If you haven't watched Shawshank Redemption, The Body, no, not The Body, what's it called? Stand By Me, and Apt Pupil, I'm also going to be talking about those movies. Everything I'm going to be talking about is going to be pretty brief because I don't want this video to be extremely long. So there's my spoiler alert. Now I'm going to just jump right into it. So I like the way that he put all of these stories together. I mean, the only thing that I didn't really like was that Apt Pupil was between Shawshank and The Body. Those two stories have the similar vibe, and then Apt Pupil does not have a similar vibe, and it's smashed in between, and I'm like, I don't like this. But let's get into it. So the first book, or the first story in this collection is called Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. So I've heard of Shawshank Redemption, the movie, didn't realize it was a short story by Stephen King until pretty recently. I haven't seen so I actually was able to read the book before seeing the movie, which is very rare for a lot of people, so yay me. I really enjoyed the short story. It was very slow and very told in King's kind of la 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 la, the way he kind of writes stories where it's very just like nonchalant. You're moving along, you find out that Red was in prison for murdering his wife and accidentally murdering his neighbor, and he becomes the go-to guy, and then it's told through narration, and then we meet our other main character who is like really big on financial stuff, and they become friends. It's just this really weird, not weird, but it's this like what's the word I'm looking for? It was just like an unknown pair. Like they weren't supposed to be friends. Unlikely. That's the word I'm looking for. It was an unlikely pairing, and the two basically form a bond, which helps him, not Red, but helps the other guy, leave prison, or escape from prison. And it was just a really well told story. Like I really liked the second half. The second half took off, and the story was beautiful. And I mean, moving into the movie, I enjoyed the movie just as much, and I really enjoyed that they were able to add the narration into it, because it really gave like just that extra oomph to the movie, and it just kind of paid homage to the short story, which is what I really liked. So yeah, that was Shawshank. The next one is Apt Pupil, so I rated Shawshank 4 stars. Apt Pupil, I rated 3 stars, which I'm like on the fence about how I wanted to rate that, because that book was very gruesome. Like, it takes place over 4 years, and you can tell that it takes place over 4 years because it is a very slow progression. Like, oh man, there were scenes that I was like, I don't think this really needed to be here, because it didn't add or do much for the story, and I was like, come on, King, please, let's not do this. So it started off really well. It ended off really well. The middle fell apart, and I think that's what really, I just didn't like it. And so there's this kid, Todd, he's 13 at the beginning of the book. He's graduating high school by the end, and he basically finds out that a Nazi commander or whatever is living in his neighborhood, and he wants to know what really happened, because he's so fascinated about the World War II and just like history in general. And he's like, well, I know that the books that I'm reading in school aren't telling me the whole truth. So he's like, I want to know what the real truth is. And he's like, now that I know that there's this person living here, I want him to give me the answers. So instead of having him go to jail, like he's like, I can call the police and report you. But he's like, I'm not going to do that. He's like, I want you to tell me the stories instead. So the two start getting together, and the old man starts telling him all the tales from the war that he had done, and this starts to freak him out, and he starts to have Todd starts to have nightmares. I mean, obviously, and then, like, in order to like make these nightmares go away, he has to start killing. It's the most bizarre thing ever. And then, like, it gets to the point where at the very end, like, I was like, oh, alright, okay, interesting. The movie definitely changed a lot. So they took out a lot of the really gruesome parts, which I was thankful for because it made watching it easier to watch and easier to stomach, because I know that if it was just that, it would not have been easy. If it was just like the book content, it wouldn't have been I don't think it would have been very pleasing to watch. So I'm glad that they decided to change things. It was interesting how they changed things, because they ended up making it so that like the teacher was kind of like crazy in the end, and I was like, this is interesting. Like, instead of like him shooting the teacher, he like what I was like, oh, okay. I was like, that's interesting. I had another thought that I forgot to write down. Let me get to it. Yeah, so to me, the movie felt more psychological than the book did, because it was like all like wrapped, like your mind it was playing games with your mind. Like, it was just so it was just an interesting perspective. And it left it more open-ended, because the fact that Todd dies in the book. So the fact that Todd doesn't die in the movie, you're like, well, what the heck happens to Todd? Like, is he gonna get away with what he's doing? Like, is he gonna become a sociopath? Like, it was just, I was like, oh, okay. And I mean, but for the most part, it was an interesting movie. I would not be watching it again, but I mean, for the most part, like I say, it was about a 3-star for me, because I liked the concept. Wow, it just was like, just a little too gruesome for my liking. So then the next short story in that collection is The Body, in which four friends, who they're like 10, between the ages of 10 and 12, they hear about a kid that's been killed on the train tracks, and they're like, well, we have to go and find it, because no one else apparently is able to find this body. Like, none of the police have been able to find it, so they're like, let us go and see if we can find it. So it becomes this like trail of like these 4 friends going off on an adventure to see if they can find it. And I mean, even though it was so slow paced, like just the way that it flowed, and just like listening to these boys like just like do things and talk to each other, like they're throwing rocks, and they're like running on the train tracks, trying to avoid a train, like all of these things that like young boys would be doing in the 1980s, right? So it was just so wholesome to read. And like you learn about all of the characters, and the main character so you get 2 kind of point of views. You get like the present, where so the main character's grown up, and he's kind of talking about and reminiscing on his days as a kid, and how he's like, oh, you'll never have kids, or you'll never have friends like you did when you were a kid. And it kind of goes into this story because Gordy, the main character, becomes a writer. And I really love Chris. Like, they really give him that solid friendship that Gordy needs. I mean, he's there for all of them. Like, when I was watching the movie, I watched this movie so many times, but this is the first time that I've watched it after, I've never read The Body. This is the first time I'm reading The Body. And now that I've read it now that I've watched it after reading, I'm like, oh, I feel like I can appreciate the movie just a little bit more. And I mean, they really give Chris a lot of credit, and you can't help but love him, because he knows the situation that he's in, but he wants to be there for all of his friends, and he's rooting for them, and he's like, well, your parents don't care about you. He's like, if I was your dad, I'd be saying X, Y, and Z. And I was like, this kid, you're so young. But I was like, he is the bestest of best friends you will ever have. And it's so sad. Like, I was like, so the 3 characters end up dying, and then in the movie, only Chris is the one that dies. And I thought that made it more sad, because then it's like, oh, all of them went off and did shitty things, but the guy who was like, he was like there for everybody, he ended up dying because he was trying to break up a fight. I was like, oh, that is, it was just so gut-wrenching to like, to see it. So I was like, oh my goodness, but yeah, it's definitely a beautiful coming-of-age story that I highly recommend. I think that was my favorite one out of all of these. Then the last short story is called The Breathing Method, which I would have never guessed what this book is about. So I actually just finished reading it today, and it's basically about a club. So this guy gets invited to the club from his boss, and after that he's never invited again, and he goes, well, maybe I want to be invited again. So he just goes without being invited, and when he goes that time, there's a doctor there who's telling a story. And so then it kind of goes from being in the club to being in this story where this woman wants, so he's treating an unmarried woman in the 1930s, a pregnant woman, and she wants to give birth no matter what. And that means so much more than it did in the beginning. I was like, what? And I was like, I didn't think that the breathing method would have anything to do with her giving birth. And I was like, that is like, I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, that's so interesting. And then you get to the end where they go back to the club, and like he's kind of like, the guy kind of wants to leave. He kind of wants to ask questions because he's like, well, what is this crazy place, this crazy club, right? And it almost felt like the story that was told about the woman was like a metaphor for the club. Like it was, I was like, this is kind of genius. I kind of like that. And I mean, the whole gruesome part about the woman and her giving birth was like, I won't spoil that part, because I'm like, if you're going to read it, I'm like, I want you to go in fresh, because, like, that was something. I was like, oh, okay, she literally was going to give birth no matter what. No matter if she had a head or not. I was like, oh my god, crazy. So, those were the 4 stories and the 3 movies. So I rated, so yeah, Shawshank was 4-star, At Pupil was 3-star, The Body I ended up rating 4-star as well, and The Breathing Method was also 4-star. So for an overall total, I'm just rating this nope, that's the back. This collection 4 stars. This was a really good collection because it wasn't traditional horror. Like it was these stories of just really good vibes, like, and just unlikely friendships forming, and they kind of surround, and then they kind of have like a hint of horror. And it's just like the prison. It's like about prison life and like just the horrors of prison life alone. And then escaping prison, because I know the movie goes more into escaping prison than the book does. The book, it takes place more in the prison, whereas the movie takes place in the prison but also outside of the prison, which is a very interesting take. But like I say, I enjoyed it, and like you don't even feel like it's like over 2 hours. It's such a quick movie. It's just a beautiful movie. But yeah, and then At Pupil, well, I mean, that was horror, like finding out all of the atrocities that happened during like World War II and like the Nazi camps, like that's definitely just horror right there. And then what that turns Todd into, again, the downward spiral is out of like just crazy. And then The Body, finding a dead body when you're 12, 12, that definitely changes you. And then watching as slowly you lose these friendships, and like they end up, those people that you were friends with end up dying, like that's an interesting kind of horror. And then even in The Breathing Method, that one as well, where it's like that woman goes through a lot. Let's just say that woman goes through a lot. That's all I'm gonna say about that, because that's the one I don't want to spoil, because I liked going in not knowing what happened, so that's why I don't want to spoil it. So that is all I have for this. This got extremely long and I didn't want it to, but so before I leave you, my next book will be Christine. I think this is the movie tie-in poster, but I like that this looks like a VHS. Like, it looks like it could be a VHS cover, so I really like this. This is going to take me about 11 weeks to get through, so I'm looking at about mid-August where I will be back to talk about Christine. So, until then, if you've read this book, or any of the short stories, or any of the movies, put a comment down below, let me know, tell me your thoughts, and I will see you all in my next video. So thanks and bye guys!